Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ve bihi nesta'in. Elhamdülillahi Rabbil alemin. Vessalatu vesselamu ala seyyidina Muhammedin ve ala alihi ve sahbihi ecma'in.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. And from Him do we seek help. All praise be to Allah, the Sustainer of all the worlds, and blessings and peace be upon our Master Muhammad, and on all his family and companions.
The 13th word.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ve nunezzilu minel Qur'an ma huve şifaun ve rahmetun lil mu'minin ve ma allamnahu şi'ra ve ma yenbaghi leh.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. And we send down, stage by stage, in the Qur'an, that which is a healing and a mercy to those who believe. We have not instructed the Prophet in poetry, nor is it meet for him. If you want to compare the results yielded by the wisdom of the all-wise Qur'an and of the sciences of philosophy and their instruction and teaching and the degrees in their knowledge, then listen carefully to the following words. With its accurate expositions, the Qur'an of miraculous exposition rends the veil of familiarity and the habitual cast over all the beings in the universe, which are known as ordinary things, but are all extraordinary and miracles of divine power, and reveals those astonishing wonders to conscious beings. It attracts their gazes and opens up before their minds an inexhaustible treasury of knowledge. As for philosophy, it conceals within veils of the commonplace all the miracles of power, which are extraordinary, and passes over them in an ignorant and indifferent fashion. It only puts forward to be noted freaks, which have fallen from being extraordinary and deviated from the order of creation, and sheared away from the perfections of their true natures. It offers them to conscious beings as objects of wise instruction. For example, it says that man's creation is ordinary, despite its being a comprehensive miracle of power, and looks on it indifferently. But then, with cries of astonishment, it points out as an object of instruction a person who has diverged from the perfection of creation and has 3 legs or 2 heads. And for example, it considers ordinary the regular sustenance of infants and young, bestowed from the treasury of mercy, which is a most delicate and general miracle of mercy, and draws a veil of ingratitude over it. Whereas, on spotting an insect under the sea, which is an exception from the general order, and is alone and isolated from its fellows, being fed with green seaweed, it wants to make the fisherman weep for it, because of the divine favour and munificence manifested on it. Footnote number 3. Just such an event occurred in America. So see the wealth and riches of the Holy Qur'an in regard to knowledge, wisdom and knowledge of Allah, and the poverty and bankruptcy of philosophy regarding learning, instruction and knowledge of the Maker. See them and take a lesson. It is because of this, because the all-wise Qur'an contains.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ve bihi nesta'in. Elhamdülillahi Rabbil alemin. Vessalatu vesselamu ala seyyidina Muhammedin ve ala alihi ve sahbihi ecma'in.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. And from Him do we seek help. All praise be to Allah, the Sustainer of all the worlds, and blessings and peace be upon our Master Muhammad, and on all his family and companions. A warning, lesson and reminder given to a number of unhappy youths. One day, a number of bright youths came to me, seeking an effective deterrent in order to guard themselves against the dangers arising from life, youth, and the lusts of the soul. Like I had told those who had previously sought help from the Risale-i, I also said to these youths, your youth will definitely leave you, and if you do not remain within the bounds of the licit, it will be lost. and rather than its pleasures, it will bring you calamities and suffering in this world, in the grave, and in the hereafter. But if, through Islamic training, you spend the bounty of your youth as thanks honourably in uprighteousness and obedience, it will in effect remain perpetually and will be the cause of gaining eternal youth. As for life, if it is without belief, or because of rebelliousness, belief is ineffective, it will produce pains, sorrows and grief, far exceeding the superficial, fleeting enjoyment it brings. Because since, contrary to the animals, man possesses a mind and he thinks, he is connected to both the present time and to the past and the future. He can obtain both pain and pleasure from them. Whereas, since the animals do not think, the sorrows arising from the past and the fears and anxieties arising from the future do not spoil their pleasure of the present. Especially if the pleasure is illicit, then it is like an altogether poisonous honey. That is to say, from the point of view of the pleasure of life, man falls to a level 100 times lower than the animals. In fact, life for the people of misguidance and heedlessness, and indeed their existence, rather their world, is the day in which they find themselves. From the point of view of their misguidance, all the time and universes of the past are non-existent, are dead. So their intellects, which connect them to the past and the future, produce darkness, blackness for them. Due to their lack of belief, the future is also non-existent. Furthermore, because they think the eternal separations resulting from this non-existence continuously produce darkness for their lives. Whereas, if belief gives life to life, then through the light of belief, both the past and future are illuminated and find existence. Like present time, it produces elevated spiritual pleasures and lights of existence for the spirit and the heart in respect of belief. There is an explanation of this truth in the seventh hope in the treatise for the elderly. You may refer to that. Life is thus. If you want the pleasure and enjoyment of life, give life to your life through belief, and adorn it with religious duties, and preserve it by abstaining from sins. Concerning the fearsome reality of death, which is demonstrated by deaths every day, everywhere, at all times, I shall explain it to you with a comparison, in the same way that I told the other youths. For example, a gallows has been erected here in front of your eyes. Beside it is a lottery office, but one which gives tickets for truly huge prizes. We people here are 10 people. Whether we like it or not, we shall be summoned there. There is no other alternative. They will call us, and since the time is secret, any minute they may say either, "Come and collect the ticket for your execution, mount the gallows," or "A ticket to win a prize of millions of dollars worth of gold has come up for you, come and collect it." While waiting for them to say this, 2 people suddenly appear at the door. One of them is a scantily dressed woman, beautiful and deceiving. In her hand is some apparently extremely delicious, but in fact poisonous candy, which she has brought wanting us to eat it. The other is an undeceiving and undeceivable serious person. He enters behind the woman and says, "I have brought you a talisman, a lesson. If you study it, and if you do not eat that candy, you will be saved from the gallows. With this talisman, you will receive your ticket for the matchless prize. Look, you will see with your own eyes that those who eat the honey mount those gallows, and until that time they suffer dreadful stomach pains from the poisonous candy. And who it is that will receive the ticket for the large prize is not apparent. It seems that they too mount the gallows. But there are millions of witnesses who testify that they can enter the prize arena easily. So look from the windows. The highest officials and the high-ranking persons concerned with this business proclaim with loud voices, just as you see with the clear certainty of your own eyes those mounting the gallows, so be certain as daylight, with no doubt or misgiving, that those with the talisman receive the ticket for the prize. Thus, like the comparison, since the dissolute pleasures of youth in the sphere of the illicit, which are like poisonous honey, lose belief, which is the ticket for an eternal treasury, and the passport for everlasting happiness, a person who indulges in them descends to death, which is like the gallows, and the tribulations of the grave, which is like the door to eternal darkness. And since the appointed hour is unknown, its executioner, not differentiating between young and old, may come at any time and cut off your head. If you give up illicit desires, which are like the poisonous honey, and acquire belief and perform the religious duties, which are the Quranic talisman, 124,000 prophets, peace be upon them, together with innumerable saints and people of truth, have unanimously announced that you shall receive the ticket for the treasury of eternal happiness, which comes up from the extraordinary lottery of human destiny, and they have pointed to traces of it. In short, youth will go, and if it goes being squandered, it results in thousands of calamities and pains both in this world and in the next. If you want to understand how the majority of such youths end up in hospitals with imagined diseases arising from misspent youth and prodigicality, and in prisons or hostels for the destitute through their excesses, and in bars due to the distress arising from their pain and suffering, then go and ask at the hospitals, prisons and graveyards. For sure, just as you will hear from most of the hospitals the moans and groans of those ill from dissipation and debauchery resulting from the drives of youth, so will you hear from the prisons the regretful sighs of unhappy youths who are being punished for illicit deeds, mostly resulting from the excesses of youth. And you will understand that most of the torments of the grave, that intermediate realm, the doors of which continuously open and shut for those who enter it, are the result of misspent youth, as is testified to by those who have divined the life of the grave, and is affirmed by the people of reality. Also, ask the elderly and the sick, who form the majority of mankind. Certainly, the great majority of them will say with sorrow and regret, "Alas, we wasted our youth on passion and fancy, indeed harmfully. Be careful, do not do as we did." Because, as a consequence of the illicit pleasures of 5 to 10 years' youth, a person suffers years of grief and sorrow in this world, torment and harm in the intermediate realm, and the calamities of hell in the hereafter. And although such a person is in a most pitiful situation, he in no way deserves pity. For those who freely consent to indulge in harmful actions may not be pitied, they are not worthy of it. May Almighty Allah save us and you from the alluring temptations of this time and preserve us from them. Amen.
سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم.
Glory be unto you. We have no knowledge save that which you have taught us. Indeed, you are all-knowing, all-wise.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate, and from Him do we seek help. All praise be to Allah, the Sustainer of all the worlds, and blessings and peace be upon our Master Muhammad, and on all his family and companions. A footnote to the second station of the 13th word.
Bismihi subhanahu.
In his name be he glorified. Those in prison are in great need of the true consolation of the Risale-i, particularly those who, having suffered the blows of youth, are passing their sweet young lives in prison. They need the Risale-i as much as they need bread. Indeed, youth heeds the emotions rather than the reason, and the emotions and desires are blind. They do not consider the consequences. They prefer 1 ounce of immediate pleasure to tons of future pleasure. They kill for the 1 minute pleasure of revenge, then suffer for 80,000 hours the pain of prison. And 1 hour's dissolute pleasure in questions of honour may result in life's enjoyment being utterly destroyed due to distress at the fear of both prison and enemies. There are many other examples, many pitfalls for the unfortunate young, because of which they transform their sweet lives into the most bitter and pitiful lives. Consider a vast state to the north, that is Russia. It has gained possession of the passions of its young people and is shaking this century with its storms. For it has made lawful for its youths the pleasing daughters and wives of upright people, and these youths act according to their feelings, which are blind to all consequences. By permitting men and women to go together to the public baths, they are even encouraging immorality, and they consider it lawful for vagabonds and the poor to plunder the property of the rich. All mankind trembles in the face of this calamity. It is therefore most necessary in this century for all Muslim youths to act heroically and to respond to this two-pronged attack with keen swords, like the fruits of belief and the guide for youth from the Risale-i. Otherwise, those unfortunate youths will destroy utterly both their futures in this world and their agreeable lives, and their happiness in the hereafter, and their eternal lives, and transform them into torment and suffering. And through their abuses and dissoluteness, they will end up in hospitals, and through their excesses in life, in prisons. In their old age, they will weep copiously with 1,000 regrets. If, on the other hand, they protect themselves with Quranic training and with the truths of the Risale-i, they will become truly heroic youths, perfect human beings, successful Muslims, and in some ways rulers over animate beings and the rest of the animal kingdom. When a youth in prison spends 1 hour out of the 24 each day on the 5 obligatory prayers and repents for the mistakes that were the cause of his disaster, and abstains from other harmful, painful sins, this will be of great benefit for both his life and his future, and his country and his nation and his relatives. And he will also gain with his fleeting youth of 10 to 15 years an eternal brilliant youth. Foremost, the Qur'an of miraculous exposition and all the revealed scriptures have given this certain good news. If such a youth demonstrates, through moderation and obedience, his gratitude for the pleasing, delightful bounty of youth, it will both increase it and make it eternal, and make it a pleasure. Otherwise, it will be both calamitous and become painful, grievous, and a nightmare, and then it will depart. It will cause him to become like a vagrant, harmful for both his relatives and his country and his nation. If the prisoner has been sentenced unjustly, on condition he performs the obligatory prayers, each hour will be like the equivalent of a day's worship, and the prison will be like a recluse's cell. He will be counted among the pious hermits of olden times, who retired to caves in order to devote themselves to worship. If he is poor, aged, and ill, and desirous of the truths of belief, on condition he performs the obligatory prayers and repents, each hour will become the equivalent of 20 hours' worship, and prison will become like a rest house for him. And because of his friends, who regard him with affection, a place of love, training, and education, he will probably be happier staying in prison than being free. For outside, he is confused and subject to the assaults of sins from all sides. He may receive a complete education from prison on being released. It will not be as a murderer or a thirsting for revenge, but as someone penitent, proven by trial, well behaved, and beneficial for his nation. In fact, the Denizli prisoners became so extraordinarily well behaved after studying the Risale-i for only a short time that some of those concerned said, studying the Risale-i for 15 weeks is more effective at reforming them than putting them in prison for 15 years. Since death does not die, and the appointed hour is unknown, it may come at any time. And since the grave cannot be closed, and troop after troop enter it and are lost, and since it has been shown through the truths of the Qur'an that for those who believe death is transformed into the discharge papers, releasing them from eternal annihilation, while for the corrupt and the dissolute it is disappearing forever into eternal annihilation, and is unending separation from their loved ones and all beings. Most certainly, and with no doubt at all, the most fortunate person is he who with patience and thanks fully benefits from his time in prison, and studying the Risale-i works to serve the Qur'an and his belief on the straight path. O man who is addicted to enjoyment and pleasure, I am 75 years old, and I know with utter certainty from thousands of experiences, proofs and events, that true enjoyment, pain-free pleasure, grief-free joy, and life's happiness are only to be found in belief, and in the sphere of the truths of belief. While a single worldly pleasure numerous pains, as though dealing 10 slaps for a single grape, it drives away all life's pleasure. O you unfortunate people who are experiencing the misfortune of prison, since your world is weeping and your life is bitter, strive so that your hereafter will not also weep, and your eternal life will smile and be sweet. Benefit from prison, just as sometimes under severe conditions, in the face of the enemy, an hour's watch may be equivalent to a year's worship, so in the severe conditions you are experiencing, the hardship of each hour spent as worship becomes the equivalent of many hours. It transforms that hardship into mercy.
Bismihi subhanahu. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
In his name be he glorified. My dear and loyal brothers, I shall explain in 3 points an effective solace for those who are experiencing the calamity of prison, and for those who kindly help them and faithfully supervise their food, which comes from outside. First point. Each day spent in prison may gain as much as 10 days' worship, and with regards to their fruits, may transform those transient hours into enduring hours, and through 5 or 10 years' punishment may be the means of saving a person from millions of years of eternal imprisonment. For the believers, the condition for gaining this most significant and valuable advantage is to perform the obligatory prayers, repent for the sins that were the cause of their imprisonment, and offer thanks in patience. For sure, prison is an obstacle to many sins. It does not provide the opportunity for them. Second point. Just as the cessation of pleasure causes pain, so does the cessation of pain give pleasure. Yes, on thinking of past happy, enjoyable days, everyone feels a pang of regret and longing and says, alas. And recalling calamitous, unhappy days of the past experiences, a sort of pleasure since they are past, and says, praise and thanks be to Allah that calamity has left its reward and departed. He breathes a sigh of relief. That is to say, an hour's temporary pain and sorrow leave behind a sort of pleasure in the spirit, while a pleasurable hour leaves pain. Since the reality is thus, and since past calamitous hours, together with their pains, are no longer existent, and future distressing days are at the present time non-existent, and there is no pain from nothing, to continually eat bread and drink water today, for example, because of the possibility of being hungry and thirsty in several days' time, is most foolish. In just the same way, to think now of the past and future unhappy hours which simply do not exist, and to display impatience and ignoring one's faulty self, to moan as though complaining about Allah, is also most foolish. So long as the power of patience is not scattered to the left and right, that is, to the past and future, and is held firm in the face of the present of the hour and day, it is sufficient. The distress is reduced from 10 to 1. In fact, but let it not be complaining. Divine favour pointed out the above fact to me while, during a few days of material and spiritual affliction, illness and trial, the like of which I had never experienced before in my life, I was being crushed in particular by the despair and distress of the heart and spirit, which resulted from my being unable to serve the Qur'an and belief with the Risale-i. I was then content with my distressing illness and imprisonment. For saying, it is great profit for an unfortunate like myself, who waits at the door of the grave, to make 1 hour, which might be passed in heedlessness, 10 hours worth of worship. I gave thanks. The third point, there is great gain in compassionately aiding and assisting prisoners, in giving them the sustenance they need, and in soothing their spiritual wounds with consolation. Giving them their food, which comes from outside, is like almsgiving, which, exactly to the amount of the food, is written in the book of good deeds of those, outside and inside, who do this, together with the warders concerned, especially if the unhappy prisoner is old, ill, poor, or a stranger. Then the reward of this almsgiving increases many times over. The condition of this high profit is to perform the obligatory prayers, so that such service is for Allah's sake. Another condition is to hasten to their assistance with sincerity, compassion and joy, and in such a way as to not make them feel obliged.
Bismihi subhanahu wa min shay'in illa yusabbihu bihamdi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu abadan daima.
In His name be He glorified, and there is nothing but it glorifies Him with praise. My friends in prison and brothers in religion, it occurred to me to explain a truth to you which will save you from both worldly torment and the torment of the hereafter. It is as follows. For example, a person killed someone's brother or one of his relatives, a murder which yields 1 minute's pleasure of revenge, causes millions of minutes of both distress for the heart and anguish of prison, and the fear of revenge by the murdered man's relatives, and anxiety of finding himself face to face with his enemy, drives away all his pleasure in life. He suffers the torment of both fear and anger. There is only one solution for this, and that is reconciliation, which the Qur'an commands, and truth, reality, benefit, humanity, and Islam require and encourage. Certainly, what is required in reality is peace, because the appointed hour is set, it does not change. Since his appointed hour had come, in any event, the murdered man would have stayed no longer. As for the murderer, he was the means of Allah's decree being carried out. So long as there is no reconciliation, both sides perpetually suffer the torments of fear and revenge. It is because of this that Islam commands that one believer should not be vexed with another believer for more than 3 days. If the murder was not the result of a vindictive grudge and enmity, and a two-faced troublemaker instigated the discord, it is essential to make peace quickly. Otherwise, that minor disaster becomes a large one and continues. If they make peace and the murderer repents and prays continuously for the man he killed, then both sides will gain much and become like brothers. In place of one departed brother, he will gain several religious brothers. He'll be resigned to divine decree and determining, and forgive his enemy, especially since they heed the lessons of the Risale-i. Both individual and public peace and well-being, and the brotherhood that there is in the sphere of the Risale-i, require that they put aside all the hard feelings that exist between them. It was thus in Denizli prison. All the prisoners who were enemies became brothers through the lessons of the Risale-i. It was one reason for our acquittal, and caused the irreligious and ungodly to say about those prisoners, Mashallah, Barakallah, and it was an utter relief for those prisoners. I myself have seen here 100 men suffer inconvenience on account of one man, and not go out to take exercise together. It is oppression towards them. A manly believer of sound conscience will not cause hundreds of other believers harm because of some insignificant and minor error or benefit. If he makes a mistake and does cause harm, he should repent immediately.
باسمه سبحانه السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
In his name be he glorified. My loyal new brothers and old prisoners, I have formed the firm conclusion that, in respect of divine favour, you are an important cause in our entering here. That is to say, with its consolation and the truths of belief, the Risale-i is to save both you from the distress of this calamity of prison, and from much worldly harm, and your life from passing profitlessly and in vain through grief and sorrow, and being wasted on the winds of fancy, and your hereafter from weeping like your world is weeping now. It is to provide you with true solace, since the reality of the matter is this: of course, you must be brothers to one another. Like the Denizli prisoners and students of the Risale-i, you can see that they examine all your possessions, food, bread and soup, which come from outside, so that a knife does not get in among you, and you do not attack one another. The warders who faithfully serve you suffer much trouble. Also, you do not go out to exercise together, as though you were going to attack one another like wild beasts. And so, new friends, who are by nature bold and courageous, with great moral courage, you should say to the group at this time, if not knives, but Mausers and revolvers were given us, and the order to fire as well, we would not hurt our friends who are unfortunate and suffering this calamity like ourselves. Through the guidance and at the command of the Qur'an and belief and Islamic brotherhood and our interests, we have decided to forgive them and to try not to offend them, even if formerly there were 100 reasons for our enmity and hostility, and so transform this prison into an auspicious place of study.
سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم.
Glory be unto you. We have no knowledge save that which you have taught us. Indeed, you are all-knowing, all-wise.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate, and from Him do we seek help. All praise be to Allah, the Sustainer of all the worlds, and blessings and peace be upon our Master Muhammad, and on all his family and companions. The air, a window onto divine unity.
باسمه سبحانه وإن من شيء لا يسبح بحمده السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته أبدا دائما.
In his name be he glorified, and there is nothing but it glorifies him with praise. My very dear and loyal brothers, my brothers, I observed in a subtle point concerning Allah's unity, which suddenly became clear while studying the page of the air on a journey of the imagination and mind. That is, in the word
هو
He, in the phrases
لا إله إلا الله
There is no God but He, and say
قل هو الله.
Say He is Allah. And that was only in its material aspect. That the way of belief is infinitely easy to the point of being necessary, and that the way of misguidance and associate partners with Allah is infinitely difficult, so difficult as to be impossible. I shall explain that long and extensive point with an extremely brief indication. Yes, if soil, one handful of which can act as a flower pot for hundreds of plants in turn, is attributed to nature or causes, it becomes necessary either for there to be present in such a handful of hundreds of immaterial machines, indeed machines and factories to the number of the plants, or for each particle of that small amount of soil, to know how to make all those different plants together with their different characteristics and living organs. Quite simply, each would have to possess infinite knowledge and limitless power like a god. The same is true for the air, which is a place of maximum manifestation of the divine will and command. Either there would have to be present on a minute scale in each of its molecules, and each waft of wind, each breath, and in the tiny amount of air expended with the word He, the innumerable different exchanges, centres, receivers, and transmitters of all the telephones, telegraphs, and radios in the world, so that each could perform those innumerable acts at the same time, or else each particle of each molecule of air exhaled with He, and indeed of the element air, would have to possess abilities and personalities to the number of all the different telephone users, telegraphers, and those who speak on the radio and know all their different languages, and broadcast them to the other particles at the same time. For such a situation is actually apparent, and every bit of air possesses that ability. Thus, in the ways of the unbelievers, naturalists and materialists, not one impossibility, but impossibilities and difficulties are clearly apparent to the number of molecules of air. If attributed to the all-glorious Maker, however, the air, together with all its particles, becomes a soldier under his command, with its Creator's permission, and through his power, and through being connected to its Creator and relying on him, and through the manifestation of its Maker's power, in an instant, with the speed of lightning, and with the ease of uttering the word He, and the movement of the air in waves, its innumerable universal duties are performed as easily as an orderly, single duty of a single particle. That is to say, the air becomes a page for the endless, wonderful, and orderly writings of the pen of power, and its particles become the nibs of the pen, and their duties the points inscribed by it. The air functions as easily as the movement of a single particle. Thus, while on my journey of contemplation prompted by the phrases
لا إله إلا هو
There is no God but He, and
قل هو الله,
say He is Allah, and while observing the world of the air and studying the page of that element, I witnessed this brief truth with utter certainty and clarity and in detail, and I understood with knowledge of certainty that it was because there is in the word He, in the air of its utterance, such a brilliant proof and flash of divine unity, and also in its meaning and allusions such a luminous manifestation of divine oneness and powerful proof of divine unity. And in that proof an indication that since the pronoun He is unconditional and indefinite, it suggests the question Who does it refer to? That both the Qur'an of miraculous exposition and those who constantly recite the divine names frequently repeat this sacred word in the station of unity. If, for example, there is one point on a piece of white paper and 2 or 3 other points are jumbled around with it, and then someone who already has numerous jobs tries to distinguish them, he will be confused, and if many burdens are loaded on a small creature, it will be crushed. And if numerous words issue from one tongue and enter one ear altogether at the same time, their order will be broken and they will be a muddle. Despite this being the case, I saw with complete certainty that with the key and compass of He, although thousands of different points, letters and words had been put in each molecule and even in each particle of the element of air, through which I journeyed in my mind, neither did they become mixed up, nor did they spoil their order. And although they performed a great many different duties, these were carried out without being confused in any way. And although very heavy loads were laid on each molecule and particle, they bore them in order without lagging or displaying any weakness at all. And I saw that thousands of different words of all different sorts enter and issue with perfect order from what is in effect those minute ears and tongues, without being mixed up and spoilt in any way. They enter those minute ears and issue from those tiny tongues, and by performing these extraordinary duties, each particle and each molecule declares through the enraptured tongue of its being and its perfect freedom, and through the testimony and tongue of the above truth,
لا إله إلا هو.
There is no God but He, and
قل هو الله أحد.
Say He is Allah, the One, and travels among air-clashing waves like storms and lightnings and thunder, without in any way spoiling their order or confusing their duties. One duty is not an obstacle to another duty. I observed this and was utterly certain. That is to say, either every particle and piece of air has to possess infinite wisdom, knowledge, will and power, and the qualities for being absolutely dominant over all the other particles, so that it can be the means of those functions being carried out, which is absurd and impossible to the number of particles, and no devil even could imagine it. Or else, and is self-evident to the degree of knowledge of certainty, vision of certainty, and absolute certainty, that the page of the air functions through the boundless, infinite knowledge and wisdom of the All-Glorious One, and is the changing page for the pen of divine power and determining, and like a signboard for writing and erasing, known as a tablet of appearance and dissolution, which has the function of the preserved tablet in the world of transformation and change. Thus, just as the element of air demonstrates the above-mentioned wonders and manifestation of divine unity in only the duty of transmitting sound, and shows the impossibilities of misguidance, so does it perform other important duties with order and without confusing them, such as transmitting subtle forces and energy, like electricity, light, and the forces of attraction and repulsion. At the same time as conveying these, with perfect order, it carries out duties essential for the lives of plants and animals, such as respiration and pollination. It proves in decisive fashion that it is a place of maximum manifestation of the divine will and command. I came to the firm conclusion that it proves that in no way is there any possibility of vagrant chance, blind force, death nature, confused and aimless causes, and powerless, lifeless, unknowing matter interfering in the writing and duties of the pages of the air. And I understood that every particle and part of it says, with the tongue of its being,
قل هو الله أحد.
Say, He is Allah, the One, and
لا إله إلا هو.
there is no God but He. Just as with the key of He, I saw these wonders in the material aspects of the air. So also, as a He, did the element of air become a key to the world of similitudes and the world of meaning. I saw that the world of similitudes is all the time taking innumerable photographs without confusing them, and that each photograph contains innumerable events occurring in this world. I understood that it was a gigantic camera and a vast cinema of the hereafter, thousands of times larger than the world, for showing the fruits of the transitory and impermanent states and lives of ephemeral beings in eternal theatres, for showing the fruits of the transitory and impermanent states and lives of ephemeral beings in eternal theatres, for showing to those enjoying everlasting bliss in paradise scenes from their old memories and adventures in this world. Footnote number 1. Since the time and place and conditions do not allow this to be proven with firm proofs and arguments like clear facts, it is cut short here. While the faculties of memory and imagination, which are two proofs, two small examples, and 2 points of both the preserved tablet and the world of similitudes, situated in man's head, are as tiny as lentils. Within them are written in perfect order, and without being mixed up, as much information as may be contained in a large library. This proves decisively that large examples of those faculties are the world of similitudes and the preserved tablet. It is definite and certain, with knowledge of certainty, that the elements of air and water, and the element air and water, like seminal fluid in particular, are far superior to the element of earth, and are written with more wisdom and will, and with the pen of divine determining and power, and that it is completely impossible for chance, blind force, deaf nature, and lifeless and aimless causes to interfere in them, and that they are a page of the pen of power, and the wisdom of the all-wise One of glory.
سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم.
Glory be unto you. We have no knowledge save that which you have taught us. Indeed, you are all-knowing, all-wise.